The Medrash says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Moshe Rabbeinu a tour of the various different chadorim and chambers in Shemayim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you see the tremendous light, the hana, the pleasure, the simcha that can't even be compared to anything that we can imagine down here in this world in that particular chamber. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu went on to explain to Moshe Rabbeinu that that is the reward for people who learn Torah. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe Rabbeinu a different cheder in Gan Eden, and Hashem Yisbarach said that is the reward for people who are Isaac in Gemilas Chesed down here in this world. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe Rabbeinu another chamber and said that is the reward for people who are Isaac in Avodah, who daven properly. And finally HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe Rabbeinu another chamber where there was also tremendous reward and schar there. And Moshe Rabbeinu asked, for whom? What did those people do to merit that particular schar? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, nothing. That is the oitzer matnas chinam. This is a part of Gan Eden where HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives schar, even though the person is not deserving of schar. It's simply a matnas chinam, a present for nothing. So Moshe Rabbeinu learned about the yesod of a matnas chinam. And then he was mispalel v'chano Hashem b'yesihi leimar. So Rashi tells us, "Alpa pisha yesh lem tzadikim litlois b'masayim atoyvim ein mevakshim el matnas chinam." Moshe Rabbeinu asked for it because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, says the Medrash, that if anyone asks from the yotzer matnas chinam, he's automatically entitled to it. And indeed, the Medrash says that Moshe Rabbeinu been mispalel one more tefillah k'minyan v'vaeschanan, then his tefillos would have to have been answered. Moshe would have gone into Eretz Yisrael, but the Eibishter asked him not to ask. Frekte Chedushay Yerim. Where's the sense of justice here? One person mutchered himself and struggled so hard, and he was up nights like days to learn and understand. The other person made a point of putting the whole world aside, and he sat down to daven like a mensch, clearly and beautifully, every single word like he's counting pieces of gold. Another person gave up his life to the Yoseg and Chesed. They're all Zeichet to Gan Eden, and here comes someone else and says, I did nothing. Okay, and he also gets in the Yotzer Matnas Chinam? Then he gets just as much schar as the other people? That sounds like politics down here in this world, not for the Olam HaEmes. Of course, what the Medrash says is true. Any Yid can ask from the Oitzer Matnas Chinam, and if you ask from the Oitzer Matnas Chinam, you will get it. But in order to be entitled to receive a grant from the Oitzer Matnas Chinam, you have to first truly believe that it is a Matnas Chinam. In other words, the Bnei Shalom, please give it to me even though I don't deserve it. You have to really believe with every fiber of your being that I who daven every day, I who give tzedakah, I who have it so hard, you have to truly believe that I don't deserve it. Were I to get what I am asking for, it would be a matnas chinam, a matana for nothing. There is absolutely nothing I did, nothing I said, nothing in my attitude, nothing in my lifestyle that qualifies for me to get this. It is a bona fide grant, a present. And that's not a very easy thing to truly believe, that you don't deserve it. If a Yid can reach that madrega with a Rebbeinu Shalom, give it to me, and I know it's not coming to me, not just saying it, but truly feels that in his heart, then he's entitled to the Yotzer Matnas Chinam. But you see, the catch is, in order to attain this kind of an attitude, there's lots of Torah that you have to learn, there's lots of davening that you have to daven, and there has to be lots of chesed that you did for others in order to be able to perceive things that way. And that is why Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the greatest honor from any other person on the face of the earth, is the one that personifies the concept and teaches us the union of Matnas Chinam. Because the key to the chamber of Matnas Chinam is Anivos. The furthest thing from the Yotzer Matnas Chinam is when you come to a HaKadosh Baruch Hu with a scorecard and say, look, I did this and I did that, how come I don't get what I want? And that is why this whole idea, this whole lesson of the Matnas Chinam is a hachana to the Yaseret Sedibros in this week's parsha. as well as the Parsha of Kriya Shema, the Yesodus of Yiddishkeit. Now, the very first Mishnah in Shas, Me'emes V'Karnas Shema, asks, when is the proper time to start reciting Shema in the evening? Now, it stands to reason that should be the first mitzvah in Shas. Basically, Kriya Shema is the first mitzvah that a bar mitzvah bachur who's mekabel oil mitzvahs has to fulfill properly. His becoming bar mitzvah comes simultaneously with nightfall, and once there is nightfall, the first mitzvah to say D'Oraisa, generally speaking, is the mitzvah of Shema. But what is interesting to note is that, back to that first Mishnah in Masechtas Brachos, Me'emes V'Karnas Shema, when do we start reciting Shema? When is the official time of nightfall? So Rabbeinu HaKadosh does not teach us about Sefer Kechavim, about Ben Hashmashos, about all the different components in the various complexities of what we consider night. Rather, Rabbeinu HaKadosh says, you want to know when night is? When the Kohanim are permitted to eat truma. And when a Kohen is Tameh, he cannot eat truma. He has to first immerse himself in the mikveh. But immersing himself in the mikveh alone is not enough. Even after the Kohen goes to the mikveh, he is still considered what is called a Tful Yain. A Tful Yain means, fine, you were in the mikveh, you came out, you're 99% pure, but not 100% pure. The completion of your purity will come with nightfall. So if a Kohen went to the mikveh a minute before nightfall, he has another minute to wait. If a Kohen went to the mikveh in the morning, he has the entire day to wait. If he went to the mikveh the night before, he has almost 24 hours to wait. The Avnei Nezer explains that even after a person tables himself in the mikveh and does tshuva, there is a vestige of the tumah. There's still a roshim of the chait that remains with him. And when does that chait leave? It leaves when the day is over. Now it's a brand new day. Of course, the day for Klal Yisrael starts at night. But as soon as it's a brand new day on the calendar, then a person is supposed to have a feeling, the Avnei Nezer explains, that regardless of what I did until now, that's in the past. Now I want to begin again. To a certain degree, every Yid is zeicher to a somewhat of an erased or clean slate. And as a result, the immediate response should be Shema Yisrael, L'Bayna Shalaylam. It's a brand new day. Let bygones be bygones. I want to be Mekabel, your El Malchus Shemai. And that is why Rabbeinu HaKadosh makes a point of stressing the Zman Kriya Shema by virtue of measuring it with the Kohen's ability to eat truma. In other words, all the effort that the Kohen puts into his Tahara process, but ultimately, what is the completion of that process? The fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, it's a brand new day, I'm giving you another chance. And every Yid has to have that feeling when he recites Shema at night. It's a brand new day now. Let bygones be bygones, let's start again. The Ben Yayad, however, brings another pshat. Why Rabbeinu HaKadosh associated the Zman Kriya Shema at night with the eating of Truma? The Zohar HaKadosh actually says that Truma and Kriya Shema are the same thing. On the words V'yikhu li Truma, the Rebbe Shem says, separate Truma for me. The Zohar HaKadosh says this refers to the mitzvah of separating those couple of moments twice a day, by night and in the morning, to recite Shema properly. In other words, we don't just say Shema, you have to stop and think, you have to stop and sort of sever yourself from all of the pressures and worries and concerns and the various different drifts and waves that carry us in all different directions down here in this world. Lift yourself above it and say, for the next couple of moments, it's between me and the Rabbeinu Shalom. I'm going to recite Shema. That's Truma. That's a lifting of yourself, a separation of yourself. That's basically what we're saying. We live our life with a mahalach of, I want this, I want that, I deserve this, I deserve that. At least during Kriya Shema, we're supposed to stop and say, Rabbeinu Shalom, you are the boss. The issue isn't what I want, the issue is, what do you want me to do? And that's why Chazal say, Kol amarach biyachad, marichon lo yama v'shnoisa. There's zeicha to a long life. And what is goyim chas v'shalom to a short life? When a person allows the pressures about him to bog him down, when he sort of gets crushed underneath it and loses hope. A proper Kriya Shema is a way of saying, all of that is irrelevant. Rabbeinu Shalom, how can I serve you? So when the Romans were about to rake the skin off Rabbi Akiva, and he was reciting Shema, his Talmidim said, Rebbe, Ad Kan, how can you be happy at a time like this? How can you recite Shema with such simcha when you're about to die? Such a horrific death. And Rebbe Akiva's answer was, all of my life I was waiting for this moment. In other words, whenever I recited Shema throughout my lifetime, it was always, regardless of what the pressures around me are, of what the difficulties and my concerns and worries are, it stops at this point. I am a Kabul Oil Malchus Shemayim. I live in a different world. And therefore, now, it applies more so than ever. By the Aleph of the Chad, you have to have in mind there's one of the Rebbeinu Shalom, by the Ches, that he is the master of the seven heavens and this world, by the Daled Ruchis HaShemayim. So there's the famous Vart from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. It's actually brought down in the Meiri as well. This is the Lashon of the Meiri. He says, Yesh Melech b'Medina. There is a king over a country. Yesh Melech b'Iroi. There is a king over his city. Yesh Melech b'Veisei. Then you have someone who's a king in his house. But the Kashish of a Kulin, what is more difficult than anything else is Liyas Melech al Gufay. That a person should be a king over his own guf. The ability to be able to control his desires. To be able to set aside his concern. The Chedushi Arim lived an unbelievably difficult life. He lost 10 children in his lifetime, Nachman al-Islam. There were periods where he experienced massive anius and dachkus. He had nothing. Didn't know where his next meal was going to come from. And when they asked him, how can you be so happy? How can you not be concerned? He said, I'm very concerned. I just worry fast. You want me to worry? Human nature would require worry under these circumstances. I worry. How long should I worry for each day? Should I worry 12 hours a day? Should I worry 24 hours a day? So I worry for an hour and I'm finished. I have the rest of the day to serve the Rebbeinu Shalom. So Kriya Shema is truma, an ability to separate yourself from the world. Again, getting back to the yisoid of our tefillah in the form of a matnas chinam, that is why Kriya Shema comes before Shemoneh Esrei. If we establish the Rebbeinu Shalom, the issue isn't what we want, the issue isn't what we deserve, but you are boss and I want to serve you, then you can possibly attain the level of matnas chinam, and then you're ready for Shemoneh Esrei, where indeed you're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for refuah, for parnasa, for all of the other brachas. Kriya Shema, as the Chedushi Arim explains it, is an ability for the Yid to be daicha the psoilis, to push away all of the ikuvim, all of the gashmiistic flaws that deter our tefillos. Through Kriya Shema we push it away and we're ready for Shemoneh Esrei. Now the Ben Yehoyada stresses another aspect of the analogy between Kriya Shema and Truma. If the Kohen is Tameh, he can't eat Truma. He has to wait out the process, which includes both Tefillah and Mikveh, and, as we said before, waiting for the new day to begin. By that same token, if the mouth of the Yid is Tameh, by virtue of Lashon Hara, Sheker, saying maybe even the right thing but at the wrong time, or the wrong thing even at the right time, so then you can't say Shema. Just like the Kohen can't eat Truma then. And that is why Rabbeinu HaKadosh does more than just drawing an analogy between Truma and Shema. He draws an analogy between the physical ability to eat Truma and Shema, says the Ben Yehoyada. Eating Truma depends on the tahara of the mouth. Saying Shema, and for the Shema to have its effect, to bring that emunah into our heart, it also requires that same level of tahara. The Medrash says, "B'shosha Yaakov Avinu nifter min ha'olam karu l'shnayim asabanav." He called his 12 sons, and he said to them, "Shimu al avichem shebashamayim, shema yesh b'levavchem achloikis al HaKadosh Baruch Hu." Perhaps there are others amongst you who have kindness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and who feel distanced from Him. So they answered, "Shema Yisrael Avinu, k'shei she'en b'levavchem achloikis al HaKadosh Baruch Hu." Just like in your heart there is no machlokes on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kach ein b'levaveinu el Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. We have our differences. As Shvatim, we each have our own mahalchim in life, but when it comes to being a kavil upon ourselves, oh malchus shemayim, it's not mere lip service. We do it with all of our hearts. And the Zohar HaKadosh says that when the Shvatim said that, and Yaakov Avinu responded, Klal Yisrael was given the presence of Kriya Shema. Klal Yisrael was given the ability to be able to recite Shema twice a day, and indeed to separate themselves from this world and all of its problems. So we were zeichen to Kriya Shema from the koyach of Yaakov Avinu. And the Ben Yehoyada explains that Rabbeinu HaKadosh Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the Mechaber, the Mishnayos, was a nitzotz of Yaakov Avinu. Just like it says, Yaakov Avinu loy meis, Chazal tell us that Rabbeinu HaKadosh came down to make Kiddush for his wife, even after he passed away, until a neighbor knocked at the door and asked to borrow something. His wife said, "Shh, my husband's making Kiddush now, you'll have to wait a moment." She asked, "Your husband, but didn't he pass away?" And she said, "So what?" And Rabbeinu HaKadosh had to inform her that now that people know about it, he can no longer come. Not because he couldn't, but it would embarrass others who didn't have this ability. Rebbe and Antoninus correspond to Yaakov and Esav, so Rabbeinu HaKadosh is a nitzvah of Yaakov Avinu. And therefore Rabbeinu HaKadosh begins Mishnayos with his mitzvah, the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema. As the Chidah stresses, Dafka Kriyas Shema Shel Arvis, because Yaakov Avinu was Mesakein Tfilas Arvis. Tfilas Arvis means davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and what requires greater courage, and that is to fulfill this union of Truma and to separate yourself from the world and be Mekabel Al Malchus Shamayim even during the difficult times, represented by night. And finally, this is the mashal that the Chavetz Chaim, and perhaps only someone like the Chavetz Chaim, can possibly convey to us as to what a Yid's feeling has to be before you recite Shema. He says it's a mashal to a young man who got into a fight, a dispute with his wife, and left her. And after a while, the son-in-law felt that this wasn't the solution. The solution would be to work things out, to compromise. But his wife wouldn't see him anymore. So he came to her father. He went to his father-in-law. And he said, "I want to make amends. I want to come back." And his father-in-law said to him, "Listen, I'm willing to be meichel you. But you have to first negotiate with my daughter. You'll have to convince her if you're not willing to start a new life." HaKadosh Baruch Hu refers to the Torah b'shem Biti, my daughter. And when HaKadosh Baruch Hu hears us say, "V'ahavta," that we want to love you, Hashem, we want to completely throw ourselves under the yoke of El Malchus Shamayim, the Rebbeinu Shem says, "I'm willing to be meichel you. I'm willing to give you all the brachos in the world. But you have to first appease my daughter." Therefore, v'dibarta bam, she refers to the Torah. V'shinantam levanecha, chinuch hayoladim, v'yolitei tafais, v'chasaftam, v'mitzvahs of tefillin and mezuzah. If you're willing to do that, I'll take you back. I'll continue to support you. And if all this talk seems to be a little bit beyond us or above us, let's remember what the Sfas Emes said. My father Chanavach used to tell it to me all the time. The Torah doesn't say bil levavecha, place the words in your heart. The Torah says al levavecha, on your heart. Every Yid can live up to the Kriyas Shema that we discussed. Put it on your heart. Try. Eventually, it's going to seep through. The Or Chaim HaKadosh says that there are 4 tanoim that are required l'kabolas ha-tefillah, so that tefillah should be accepted. First, that a person should be mispalel ke'oni hadoifik ala Pesach. The first is an issue of his attitude. His attitude in tefillah should be that of a poor person standing and knocking on a door. Like the pasuk says, Tachnunim yidaber rosh. A poor person, begging, appreciating the fact that you're even allowing him the opportunity to step in, or at least to listen to him. The second condition is that he should ask his tefillah mimekar harachamim. In other words, no justification. Rebbeinu Shalom, I am deserving to get this, to be granted my wish, because after all, didn't I do this and that for you? Wrong mahalach. Do you want your tefillah to be answered and approach it in a kar harachamim? Rebbeinu Shalom, there is a source of rachmanis. Rachmanis means whether I am deserving or not. Then you grant tefillah. The third is of the Or Chaim HaKadosh, the zman ha-tefillah. Certain times are more opportune. Like the pasuk says, "V'ani sefilasi l'cha Hashem eis ratzon." And the fourth condition, explains the Or Chaim HaKadosh, is that his tefillah should be mefereshes. He should not express himself in a vague way. He should be as articulate as possible, to the best of his capability. Spell out exactly what you want. And the Or Chaim HaKadosh refers over here to the famous medrash of the person who was walking in the desert, and he kept on saying, if only I had a donkey. If only I had a donkey. HaKadosh Baruch Hu,
You can't provide a donkey for me? You can do anything. How come I don't have a donkey here in the desert? And all of a sudden he noticed a sheik walking toward him, and he said, guess what? My donkey just gave birth to a baby donkey, and the baby donkey can't walk yet. And guess who's going to be carrying him for the rest of the way? And the sheik had a big sword, and the Yid had no choice. So as he's now walking in the hot desert sun, and Salas on Atzuris, he's also schlepping a donkey over his shoulders, he's saying to himself, maybe he shouldn't be such an Oiber Chacham anymore. Why did he have to say to the Rebbeinu Shalom, now why can't you get me a donkey? Well, he demanded a donkey, so he got a donkey. So you have to be mefereshes. You have to clearly spell out what you want. The truth is, in that medrash, that person was sort of like testing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Let's see if you can somehow get me a donkey here in the middle of the desert. And that's what the Or Chaim HaKadosh means. What do you want? You want to test the HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Okay. Then the HaKadosh Baruch Hu has ways of answering you. Do you feel you're lost and you want to ask of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu to have Rahmanas on you and to ease your plight? That's a whole different issue. But make it very, very clear in terms of how you present your request. Dr. Or Chaim HaKadosh, all of this is merumas over here in the first pasuk. Vaeschanan, a lashon of tachnunin, like an ani, knocking on the door. That is the attitude of tefillah. You know what it feels like if you have to go and collect money and you're knocking on the door? The Panovich Rav used to say an interesting thing. And you have to bear in mind, there's probably no one that had the ability to gather funds where the Panovich Rav did. The most stiff-necked, stingy, stubborn personalities crumbled in his presence. The Panovich Rav had a way of presenting the situation that it's all in your hands now. This institution of Torah is going to be built up. If you want to be part of it, join. If not, I'm going elsewhere. And this Panovich Rav said sometimes when he would knock on the door of a gevir and he was told no one is home or no one would answer, he would breathe a sigh of relief. As if to say, okay, I tried and no one's home, what can I do? If he was home, I would have to talk to him. Because to ask someone for something is not an easy thing. And especially when you're knocking on the door asking for yourself. So vaeschanan, that's number one, a lashon of tachnunin. That's the first Tanai. The second Tanai is El Hashem, that his bakasha was from the makar of Rachamim, like Rashi says, Eimat Naschina. The third Tanai, the Eis Hahi, the Eis Hayidua Lekabbalas HaTfilah, which is an Eis Ratzon. And who, more so than Moshe Rabbeinu, knows when the Eis Ratzon is? In this case, the Or Chaim HaKadosh explains, Moshe Rabbeinu may have felt that it was an Eis Ratzon because of the kivush of Sichon V'Oig and so on, but a person in his own heart can also sometimes have a feel for when there's an Eis Ratzon for Tefillah, which is interesting, because when we open up the Aron Kodesh Shabbos Mincha for Kriyas HaTorah, then we say, V'nisi v'losi l'cha Hashem Eis Ratzon. Shabbos Mincha was the time of the Petil of Moshe Rabbeinu. Officially, the Nusach that we have Shabbos Mincha, Ato Echad V'Shimcha Echad, is a kind of, not mamish avelus, because it is Shabbos, but a little bit of an avelistic, a kind of a nigun, because it was the time of Histalkus of Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, through his very essence, represents to a great degree an opportune time for tefillah. Moshe Rabbeinu generates an Eis Ratzon, a time to be mispalel. The Medrash Pinchas says whenever, he quotes this from the Zohar, whenever the Aron Kodesh is opened up and Sifrei Torah are taken out, it's an opportune time to be mispalel. I mean, the Berich Shemei is the tefillah that we take for granted, but it's the makar of all brachos if we think about the words carefully. So Moshe Rabbeinu zeroes in on an Eis Ratzon, the Eis Hahi. And the fourth condition, Leimar. Leimar. You have to be mefarish what you're saying. Don't express yourself in vague terms where it can be interpreted the wrong way. Now, in Chazal, there are different interpretations and understandings of what the Eis Hahi means. Some say it's when the Kadosh Baruch Hu said, Leisavi Yasakol. That was Moira Moshe Rabbeinu to be mispalel. Some say it's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Kachas Yeshua, that was Miriam Moshe Rabbeinu to be Mispalel. It's not a secret, says the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. Whenever Moshe Rabbeinu was moved by an event, his response to that event was Tefillah, the Esahi. Perhaps now is an Eis Ratzon. Now, if we think into what the Orach Chaim HaKadosh just told us, that's a very telling explanation as to what Eis Ratzon is. Eis Ratzon means an emotional time in a person's life. Eis Ratzon means something happened, an event happened, someone said something to you, a piece of information was just relayed to you. Something happened in your life, in my life, that gives us a jolt, that rattles our cage, so to speak. It may be something pleasant, it may be something to be apprehensive about. Whatever the case may be, if instead of shrugging or getting angry, we focus our attention on tefillah during that point, then it becomes an Eis Ratzon. Different things happened over here in Moshe Rabbeinu's life, and they were not pleasant for him. The people will not enter Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu himself is instructed to present Yeshua with the reins of leadership. And Moshe Rabbeinu takes these sensitive moments in life that inevitably we all have to face one way or another, and he applies himself to tefillah. His response is tefillah. Now, people can have a different response to these trying times in life, to these kinds of crossroads. Some of us may give up, some of us may be angry, some of us may get frustrated. Those are all natural reactions. Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching us that another reaction could be tefillah, and that creates an Eis Ratzon. When you focus your attention and you divert your energy, whether it's grief or anticipation, to tefillah, then you have created an Eis Ratzon. There's an interesting machlokes in the Sechtas of Avodah Zarah, Daf Zayin. Rabbi Eliezer says that a person should first state his personal requests in tefillah, and only then should he praise Hashem. And Rabbi Yeshua says, no, it's the other way around, like we do it. First you praise Hashem, and then you state your personal request. And Rabbi Yeshua says, look how Moshe Rabbeinu did it. In Parshas vaeschanan, first he praised Hashem, and only then did he say, no, please, allow me to pass and see the land. Rabbi Eliezer's response to that is, there's no raya for Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu was such a great person. Rashi explains. Moshe Rabbeinu was such a great person, he had a right to praise Hashem before he started davening, but we don't have a right to praise Hashem before we start davening. If we were to praise Hashem before we started davening, that would look like we're being conceited. It would be mechzi ki yahiv. Frek the Ber Moshe, the Yerusha Rebbe Zechon Levracha, he quotes this from his father, he says, it's a pella. The issue over here between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua doesn't appear to be whether it's proper to praise Hashem or not. The issue is the order. Rabbi Yeshua says, first praise Hashem and then daven. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, first daven, first state your personal requests and then praise Hashem. But Rabbi Eliezer also acknowledges you're supposed to praise Hashem. The only question is whether before or afterwards. So what does Rabbi Eliezer mean? Well, there's no right from the way Moshe Rabbeinu did it. Moshe Rabbeinu had a right to praise Hashem, but we can't. For us, we would be conceited if we were to think we could even praise Hashem. But you're also saying you should praise Hashem. You're just saying do it afterwards. Now, before we start davening, we say Hashem sefasai tiftach, ufi yagit l'secha. Rabbeinu Hashem, please, sefasai tiftach, open my lips. Ufi yagit l'secha, my mouth will speak your praise. There's an issue of whether or not a person can say this, because you're really not supposed to be mafsik between Gol Yisrael and Shmei Nesrei. Chazal liken one who says Baruch Atah Hashem Gol Yisrael, and then there's some type of interruption before he begins Shmei Nesrei to someone who knocks at the door of the king, and the king comes to open up the door, and you run away. A childish prank, but even a child can sometimes get punished for that. When a grown-up does it, he's thrown out. Despite that, the Gemara says we still have a right to say Hashem sefasai tiftach between Gol Yisrael and Shmei Nesrei, because Chazal were masakin this as part of the structure of tefillah. It's not considered a hefsek; it's part of the davening. The Yerusha Rebbe Zechon Levracha explains what Chazal mean over here, that it's part of the davening. It's not just that we have an excuse so we can say Hashem sefasai tiftach. Chazal is saying more than that. Chazal is saying this Hashem Sefasei Tiftach is our prelude to our tefillah. Even more than that, it's our license to daven. Because the embassy is what chutzpah do we have to daven. I mean, imagine the following scenario. It happens all the time. A worker, nervous, full of apprehension, is all nervous. He knocks on the boss's door. The boss summons him in and says, "What can I do for you?" And he pulls out a list and he says, "Boss, you're really a great guy. But I want to tell you something. Enough is enough. I demand," and he starts reading his demands. "I demand a raise. I demand more vacation time. I demand more assistance. I demand better working conditions." And he goes on and on and on, and the boss is appalled. He says to him, "Excuse me, how many days have you come late this past year? How many projects were left uncompleted? How many workers under you had to leave because they were dissatisfied with the way you treated them? How many of your superiors said you aren't cooperating with them? You want more leisure time? I'll give you all the leisure time in the world. Don't bother coming in at all." Of course, when he realizes that meant without pay, he wasn't so happy with all of this leisure time. So a worker who knows that he's irreplaceable, although the world says no one is, but a worker who knows at least it's going to be difficult to replace him, and he has many other people that would be willing to hire him, so he can be more bold in his requests. But everyone else has to be very cautious, and to come in and start reading from a list doesn't sound like the right idea under any set of circumstances. So what chutzpah do we have to come before the boss of all bosses and to start reading a list? Here's a list. 18 brachas. The vaeschanan. We want this, we want that, we want this, we want that. What's the response to that? Shouldn't we anticipate the same kind of response? How many things did you do that you weren't supposed to do? How many things did you not do that you were supposed to do? Where do we get the right to ask? And the answer is that's why we preface our tefillas with Hashem Sefasei Tiftach. This is what we're saying. We're saying at Rabbeinu Shalom, we don't have the right to ask. And therefore, I'm asking you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem Sefasei Tiftach, please open my mouth. And that's why we say, Ufi Yagit Elisacha, my mouth should speak your words. We don't say V'Agit Elisacha, and I should be able to state your praises. We're saying, Rabbeinu Shalom, I don't even belong here. But Ufi, I'm asking you a favor. I'm asking you a taiva. I have no one else to turn to. Ufi, create a mouth which my mouth is not deserving of fitting the description of this mouth. But Ufi, Yagit Elisacha, let this mouth that is deserving of it say your praises. A person may feel it's coming to it. A person may feel he's not at this madrega. So Adarabah, that's part of the tefillah. The Rabbeinu Shalom put me into this position that I understand I'm not deserving to be here. Don't allow me to fool myself. Because there's so much of a greater chance this way my tefillahs are going to be answered. So what's the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua? Rabbi Eliezer says, look, a person is not realistic about this. You're going to start praising Hashem. What are you praising Hashem for? You believe that you're on your own. But if first you're going to start stating your tefillah, Rabbeinu Shalom, I need das, Rabbeinu Shalom, I need refuah, Rabbeinu Shalom, I need parnasa, and all of a sudden you start realizing all these things that you need, and you start realizing that every second of security is a matana of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that every breath is a present of Hashem. When you verbalize your tefillah and you realize how much you have to come on to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that leads to your hachna. Then you say, wow, I'm a nothing. Rabbeinu Shalom, please help. Then you're ready to praise Hashem. But before you state your tefillah, then you're not ready to acknowledge just how much you need HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says first state your tefillah and then praise Hashem. And that's what Rabbi Eliezer says there's no raya from Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe was on of Mikol Adam. Moshe went up to Shemayim. He saw what the human being is. He saw how HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us every single breath as a present. Moshe was able to praise Hashem before davening. For us to do that, it's mechzi ki yahira. It's like we're being conceited. Rabbi Yeshua, however, has a different opinion. Rabbi Yeshua says, Enochanami, if we properly were mechavein our tefillah and we realize how much we needed HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the requests themselves should lead us to hachna. But on the other hand, our situation is so bad that we don't have the right to even start requesting without first praising Hashem, without first making this hagdama that, boss, the truth is I have no right to be here, and the truth is you should just fire me for walking through the door. But despite that, Rabbeinu Shalom, I beg of you, please listen to me. You have to do it before the actual tefillah. True, the bakashas themselves can lead to Yiras Shamayim, but Rabbi Yeshua said, but we can't get to first base. We don't have the right to make those bakashas before we praise Hashem. So the Ber Moshe says that's shot in the pasuk. Vaeschanan el Hashem. We begin our tefillah begging to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, saying, Rabbeinu Shalom, please don't allow me to forget for one split second, Hashem, sefasai tiftach. I don't have the right to even make this request. It's a chutzpah for me even to ask. And if you acknowledge that and you understand it's a chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we can dive into Him, then be'esahi leimar. Then you have arrived at the proper state of mind, the proper time period, leimar, to indeed indulge and to engage in every request that your heart desires. It is Dafka the Shabbos after Tisha B'Av, the Shabbos after Chorban, that we are reminded of the Yesod HaTefillah. Just learn how to ask, and indeed HaKadosh Baruch Hu is willing to listen to whatever we have to ask for. Rabbi Yitzchak Avorka was once terribly embarrassed by someone, and he made nothing of it. And when one of his Chassidim made a point of how the Rebbe can be so aloof of Olam Hazeh, not to be affected by such embarrassment, the Rebbe answered, it has nothing to do with any lofty madrega. It has to do with Amunah. If I was embarrassed, it is not an issue between him and me. The issue is that there was a gzeira min hashamayim, I should be embarrassed, and I have to deal with that gzeira. If I walk out and I trip, so I have to ask, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow this to happen? And I have to make a din v'cheshbon. I'm not angry at the doorpost. I'm not angry at the threshold. If it rains outside, I'm not angry at the rain. If someone embarrassed me or someone hurt me or someone hit me, then it has nothing to do with him. Yes, megalgal and chayv al yedei chayiv. That doesn't take away the responsibility from someone who does the embarrassing. Or it doesn't take away the schar from someone who helps someone. But ultimately it is the hashgacha min hashamayim. The effect is the gzeira min hamakom despite whatever the cause is. The cause is just a shliach. And he said a marshal to this. He was once traveling, and he came into a certain town where no one knew him. Someone passed by and gave him a rather angry look. Rabbi Yitzchak couldn't understand this. Why is that person angry at me? I don't even know who he is. And then he noticed that that person came back with a whole crowd of people, and they were all angry at him. And finally they surrounded him. He had no idea what they wanted. And one of them started to scream, so, you think you can just pass by this town and we won't realize who you are? And Rabbi Yitzchak said, no, I'll tell you exactly who I am. My name is Yitzchak. And the other one said, your name is Yitzchak? And he slapped him across the face. How dare you lie to us? They grabbed me and they schlepped me to Bezdin. And the Bezdin started screaming at me. So you thought you could run away without giving your wife a get? I had no idea what they were talking about. I never ran away. I am Baruch Hashem happily married, and I have a wonderful family. I never entertained the idea of giving a get, neither does my wife want a get. And the Rav started to yell and scream at me and said, you are not going to leave over here until you give a get. To your wife, how dare you leave her alone? I began to explain that apparently I look like someone else, but I am not that someone else. But they didn't believe me, and they began to beat me and forced me to write this get, which of course I couldn't write because I was scared they're going to think that they have a get, that I'm not the real husband. So they beat me mercilessly for 3 days until the real husband was caught someplace else, and it occurred to them, obviously, that they had made a mistake. Now, after a while I began to think, should I be angry at these people or not? They apologized. But should I really be hurt or angry? When they were beating me, were they beating me? No, they were beating this husband. They just happened to think that this husband was me. This was nothing personal between me and them. It was a case of mistaken identity, and I had to pay the price. So next time, if I had to deal with this Bezdin, was I angry at the Bezdin? Okay. You can argue the Bezdin should have been more careful. But look, it just so happens that I look exactly like that person, and someone gave them a tip that I would be passing by town, and all the circumstantial evidence pointed to the fact that I was that husband. The reality is, they were not beating me. They weren't bad. They were doing what they thought they were supposed to do. It was a hashgacha that I should have to be there. But, said Rabbi Yitzchak Levorka, the next time someone embarrassed me knowing good and well who I am, I realized the same thing. It's not between him and me. It was hashgacha min hashamayim. That I should be embarrassed. The same way it was a hashgacha min hashamayim that I should be beaten on that day. It's not between me and him. He's not attacking me. He is a shliach from the Rebbeinu Shalom. Zok the Chavetz Chaim, this is exactly what the pasuk is saying. V'yadata hayayim. Know therefore this day, v'hashevoisa el levavecha, and bring it back repeatedly to the innermost part of your heart. Ki Hashem hu Elokim, b'shamayim mimau, in the heaven and above, v'al ha'aretz mitachas, and on earth and beneath, ein oid, there is nothing else. Zok the Chavetz Chaim, b'shamayim mimau. You arrange a parade and you walk outside and it's raining. No parade. Are you angry? Are you angry at the Rebbeinu Shalom? You accept the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom made it rain today. Are you angry at the weatherman? He just predicts the rain. He doesn't make it rain. So you should know, just like Pasha Maya Mimau, you see clearly it's all HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the person that shoved you, the person that pushed you, the person that took away your aliyah, that took away your place in shul, that advised you to buy a stock that he knew was not good. It all comes from the same source as that rain does, from the Rebbeinu Shalom. Again, it does not take away the responsibility of the person who hurt you and doesn't rob the person of the schar if he helped you. But ultimately, in terms of what happens to you or me, that is a gzeira min hamokim, and it has absolutely nothing to do with whoever presented it to me, whoever facilitated it. The quotes from the Gemara, the person doesn't bump his finger down here in this world. You make money or you lose money, whatever is on your sheet. That happens to come a person's way. Says the Chavetz Chaim. Someone embarrassed you, someone mamish cursed you in the worst way. This is min hashamayim on the person's sins. There's a reason that person is the one who's hitting you. He's going to have to be punished for his hitting you, but that has nothing to do with you being hit. The Chaim, says the Chavetz Chaim weiter, someone comes over, not by mistake. B'mezid, he slaps you across the face. You should know who gam kein hashgacha no maila. Once again, that doesn't mean he's not going to be punished for the slap. But by the same token, you were supposed to be slapped. The Chaim Messinu b'David, Shekil loy Shimi ben Geira cursed David HaMelech, through stones at David HaMelech, through earth at David HaMelech, and David's response was, Hashem Amar Lekala, leave him alone. Hashem told him to curse. The Chol the Oisa Hashem Yisbarach l'Toiva Sa'adam, all of this HaKadosh Baruch Hu does l'Toiva Sa'adam, so that he should have a kapara on his avonos through the embarrassment. Don't even think about the person who's doing it to you. He is just a shliach. Kedugma, says the Chavetz Chaim, of someone who is washing off dirt or brushing out your hair, and he has to use real hot water, and it may be uncomfortable or hurt b'shas ma'isa. You're not angry at the person. Well, the same is true for the slap. Now, it's easy to talk about this. It's harder to accept when you get slapped. And therefore the Chavetz Chaim said that yes, the Yadata Hayoim, everyone may know this today. We may chazer it, we may learn Musar for, and we may concentrate on this, but the Hashivoisa El Levavecha, the trick is, bring it into your heart. Apply it the next time someone gets under your skin or really hurts you. Can you view yourself as the person who is being hit because someone else is the husband? It's just a gzeira you should be here. Ki Hashem hu alikim, Hashemayim mimal v'aloretz mitachas, ein oy, there is nothing else. These people doing the hitting have nothing to do with it. The emphasis of Sham Shmuel Hirsch also understands the pasuk this way. The Hashivoisa el levavecha means that you have to keep returning it to your heart, like the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, to return it. In other words, we know this is not an easy concept to grasp. If someone slaps you, you're angry at the person who slapped you. If someone hurts you, So the focus of your resentment is solely by nature on the person who committed that act of pain toward you. But that's your natural response. Take a deep breath and return to your heart. Say it, repeat it, work on it. Ki Hashem hu Elokim. I know it's not easy. That's what the pasuk says. You have to keep returning this to your heart. You have to keep working on yourself. Now, Shamshua Folhers brings out the same message in the pasuk through another insight. Ki Hashem hu Elokim. Hashem is the Shem Havaya, the Shem of Rachamim. Elokim is the Shem of Midas Hadin, the strict judge. Sometimes when things go our way, we feel the presence of the Shekhinah. He appears to us as Hashem. The Rebbeinu Shalom, who loves his children, who looks at every passing moment of the present with an eye to the future, ultimate happiness of mankind. And sometimes we go through an experience of Elokim, the God of nature, the strict judge who allows effects to follow causes naturally. That is the appearance. But you, Moshe Rabbeinu says, you have to understand ki Hashem hu Elokim, that there is no difference. That the same Hashem is also Elokim. When it looks like that you're trapped by nature, understand this is also the Gzeira min HaMakayim. It's also min HaShamayim. The Nefesh HaChaim says that this isn't just a message. This is a control panel. The more you emphasize this, the more you believe it, the more you work on yourself to understand Ki Hashem hu Elokim ein oid movadai, then the more you will see it. This is the Lashon of Rav Chaim Volozhin in the Sefer Nefesh HaChaim. Ube'enes hu inyan gada v'skulen efla lehaser ulevatel me'olav kol dinin v'retzaynais acherim shelo yuchlu lishleit boy v'leyasu shum roishim klal. If you feel you're being controlled and you feel you're being threatened, then the more you emphasize this concept within your heart, then the less effect these threatening elements will have on you, to the point where they will have absolutely no effect on you. When a person establishes in his heart to say, continues the Nefesh HaChaim, that there's nothing else besides the Rebbeinu Shalom, like the Gemara emphasizes, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is Bashamayim Imal, the Rebbeinu Shalom is in heaven upwards above you, in the whole unmeasured space of heights, and on earth downwards below you, in the whole unmeasured space of depths. The Hakol Moli Rakachdusei Apashet Yisbarach Shemai Umevatel Beliboy Bittel Gomer, and you can get your heart to the point where you understand that everything else is bottle. The Eine Meshgiach Klal Im Shum Koyach B'Ratzim Ba'olam. I'm not under any other force. Umeshabed umedabek toyer machshavtoi rak lo odem yochid baruch hu, and you can commit your whole thought process, your whole belief, every fiber of your being, every ounce of your emotions, to the fact that everything is the Rebbeinu Shalom, that everything is in the Rebbeinu Shalom's hands. Shememela, it'll be automatic. That yizbatlu me'olav kol hakoyches v'retzayna shebiyayil. Then everything else you will see become bottle around you. Shalai yuchlu lifolay shem davar klal. Nothing will be able to hurt you. The Brisker said when he was running to Lithuania, and the roads were packed with SS troops, striking at anyone that they saw, anyone that they had a havamina that was Jewish, he continuously chazed over these words, because he once had a similar story with his father, Rav Chaim, where they were saved. That was during World War I, when they had to run from one place to another. But at this point, the Brisker said he didn't stop thinking of these words that the Nefesh HaChaim says. He repeated it again and again and again. When a person establishes in his heart to say, everything else becomes bottled. No one can do anything to you. And I continued chazering this concept. I continued breathing it, digesting it, absorbing it every single second of the perilous journey. And once, the Brisker said, I was distracted for a moment, and as if he came up from under the ground, I suddenly saw a German soldier in front of me that wanted to hurt us. I don't know what happened, but I continued thinking again and again the words of the Nefesh HaChaim, And somehow the soldier suddenly turned around, focused his attention elsewhere, and we continued on. As a matter of fact, the Chassam Sofer expresses the same idea this way. It says that Bizman Yisrael Oisn L'Tzayne Shel Makayim, so ha'aretz nasa levnei Adam, v'tzadik moishel yiras elikim. And it's a lashon ha'chazal v'akadosh baruch hu menutzach mivanav. In other words, when Yidden do the right things, the tzaddik has a koyach hatfila, tzaddik goes about Kadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim, and the Rebbeinu Shalom changes his gzeiros accordingly. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, you control it. Schacter the pasuk should have said, Ki Hashem hu alikim, Mashamayim yimal v'aloretz mitachas ein acher. There is no one else. What do we mean ein oid? The lotion of ein oid seems to indicate, and it didn't happen yet. If you want to say that it's only him and no one else, it should have said ein acher. So this is the message, basically the same thing that the Nefesh HaChaim is saying. That this pasuk is saying something b'loshen vidui, as if to say, look at your matzah, you still have so much to work on yourself. Ki Hashem hu alakim b'shamayim yimal v'aloretz mitachas ein oid. It didn't happen yet that the Rebbeinu Shalom relinquished his control down here. Because if you were maimin v'hashivayis elavecha the way you should, that everything is a gzeir min hashamayim, and the Rebbeinu Shalom will put things into your hands. Your ability to cope with the gzeir, and even more so, according to the Nefesh HaChaim, to be mevatel the difficult mikatrigim, hinges on your ability of v'hashivayis elavecha. So when you consider Ki Hashem Elokim Hashemayim Yimal V'Aloretz Mitachas, and the Rebbeinu Shalom did not transfer it over to Tzaddik Geizer HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim, it's because Ein Oid, it didn't happen yet that you had enough v'hashivayis elavecha, that you have enough amunah. In a time of Astaras Panim, in a time of Messiah, a person loses his amunah. And the catch is that that's what aggravates the Messiah. That's the test. The Slonimer Rebbe touched the Yadata Hayoim refers to Shabbos. Yoim the Shabbat. On Shabbos, it's easy to break the lock in our hearts. The Yadaita is a lotion of Tainug, a lotion of Chibur, of a close relationship. If we're going to feel a Tainug, a pleasure, in the Kedusha of Shabbos, it is the Yadata. When it comes to Hayoim, when it comes to Shabbos, then the result is v'hashivayis elavecha. You will be able to take all of your machshavos and return it to your heart throughout the entire week. In other words, your amunah during the week is based on your level of treating Shabbos properly. And this skula of transferring the kedusha of Shabbos throughout the week applies to everyone, whether a person is in a pchin of bashamayim mimal, a great tzaddik, or he's in the lowest of madregas, he's v'aloretz mitachas. You should know, ki ein oid. There is no limit to the level of ashras hashchina that a person can inject during the week by properly treating the kedusha of Shabbos. There is a famous story of a family that came to Eretz Yisrael for the first time. This before the turn of the century, when a trip to Eretz Yisrael was wrought with tremendous amount of danger and mesiras nefesh. And the family finally arrived at the gates of Yerushalayim. The longing, the anticipation, everyone, every member, every grown member of this family, every child knew what they went through, had experienced Shiva Nadira Gehenim to get to Eretz Yisrael, and finally they were there. And there was a man selling Rumanim, pomegranates. They had never seen Rumanim in Eastern Europe. Even oranges were hard to come by. And the father proudly purchased the Rumanim, and with trembling hands, and with a heart full of affection and love, he distributed it to his children, and they attempted to eat it, and they found it very bitter. They couldn't swallow it, and they all started to cry. They assumed that they were not zeicha to feel the sweetness of the peiros of Eretz Yisrael. And as they huddled together in a small temporary shack, as they were looking for a place to live, Yidden came out and greeted them. And they asked them why they were so sad. They had arrived in Yerushalayim, and they told them that they felt that perhaps they were not worthy of it. They had eaten the pomegranates, and to them it seemed sour, it seemed bitter, even repulsive. Until finally one elderly Svardish Chacham stepped forward and he said, "May I ask you a question? Which parts of the pomegranates did you eat?" And they said, "Well, we put away the pits and we tried to eat the fruit naturally." And he laughed. He said, "With the Rumanim, it's the other way around. It's the pits that are sweet. The flesh of the fruit, so to speak, tastes bitter to everyone." The family was much moved, but the Chacham continued. You ought to know, however, that this is a good lesson. True, Eretz Yisrael is the palace of the king. It is the makom of Ashras Hashchina. But you have to be zeicha to be able to see the things that are sweet and reject the things that are sour. A person can live in Eretz Yisrael, and the real Kiddush of Eretz Yisrael can remain behind a veil and hidden to him. And that's why explains the Chatzker Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu was inspired by Eberno the Ereh es ha'aretz ha'tayva. I should be zeicha to see the tayva in the land, the Kiddush es ha'aretz. There is no guarantee just because a person is there that he can properly discern Kiddusha from the Kayches HaTumah. It is the opinion of the Smag that now bracha mi en shalish, when we make in our michya or in our eitz, we should omit the words of the Necham mi pirya v'nizba mituva, that we crave for Eretz Yisrael, to eat from its fruit and to be satiated from its goodness. The Smag's shita is, that's not why you should want Eretz Yisrael because of its fruits. You want Eretz Yisrael because of its mitzvahs. And the Smag's shita not to say the Necham mi pirya v'nizba mituva is based on the Gemara. The Gemara dashes the pasuk in this week's Sedra, Eberno the Eretz ha'aretz ha'tayva darash av sinlai mitnei manis ava Moshe Rabbeinu l'chanes li'Eretz Yisrael. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu crave to come into Eretz Yisrael? Did he need to eat from its fruit? Or did he want to be satiated from the pleasantness and the goodness of Eretz Yisrael? Is that what Moshe Rabbeinu really was tempted for? Absolutely not. Elakacham Moshe. Have a mitzvahs in Tzava Yisrael. Klal Yisrael were given many mitzvahs. The aim is Kain Elu B'Eretz Yisrael, many mitzvahs that can only be fulfilled in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, Echanes ani la'aretz, L'bayna Shalaylam, allow me to enter the land. Kidei sheyiskaimu kulan al yadai. I want to be able to fulfill all of the mitzvahs. And there are those that simply cannot be done here in the Midbar. So the Gemara seems to suggest it sarcastically. Moshe Rabbeinu would go into Eretz Yisrael, v'chilech mi pirya yitzarech, or l'zvaya mituva. So how can we say in our Alamichya, and this is what we are hoping for, v'nachal mi pirya v'nizba mituva? Apparently that's not a lofty goal. We're saying that that wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu's intention. Moshe Rabbeinu had a higher intention. His intention was to fulfill the mitzvahs, not just to taste the sweet fruit. But obviously we don't ask him like this man. For when we make an Alamichya, we do say the Necham mi pirya v'nizba mituva. The Bach vehemently argues on the Smag, and this is his lashon. Tema. It is a wonder. How can he say such a thing? How can you somehow demoralize a craving for the fruit of Eretz Yisrael? How a Kiddusha Sa'aretz Nishbaba, the Kiddusha in the fruits of Eretz Yisrael, in the Gashmiistic fruits, where does that emanate from? Where does that holiness come from? Says the Bach. That comes from higher heavenly realms. Every orange in Eretz Yisrael, every apple in Eretz Yisrael, every grape in Eretz Yisrael is directly connected to Hashpos of Kedusha in the Shemei HaShemayim, in the Olam HaSu'ayinam. The parents of Eretz Yisrael draw an energy from the Kedusha of the Shechina that dwells the Keref Haaretz in the land, says the Bach. And therefore the pasuk cautions us at the end of Parshas Nasai. Lo yisatami yisa'aretz asher atem yeshvin ba, asher ani shaychem b'saycha, ki ani Hashem shaychem b'saych b'nei Yisrael. The pasuk explains to us that if you do the wrong things in Eretz Yisrael, especially in Eretz Yisrael, the Aveira is magnified. The Shechina that is so sensitive to Chet will leave, and as a result, you are causing the Peiros not to be able to draw on the normal Kedusha that they are accustomed to, that they are grown for. And then Klal Yisrael who eats those Peiros cannot derive the same level of Kedusha. In any event, the Bach concludes. So what we are being mispal for in our Alamichya, when we say V'noichel mipirya v'nizba mituva, is that we should be zeicha to eat Peiros of Eretz Yisrael that indeed are nurtured in an environment that is naki min hachet. So therefore the Ashras HaShechina dwells properly in Eretz Yisrael, naturally in Eretz Yisrael. And when someone swallows that grape, or eats that orange or a quarter of an apple, there is a level of Kedusha that has now elevated to this being. When the Bel Zerav, the Chaim Levracha, first came to Eretz Yisrael during the war years, food was rationed, there was scarce, hunger and war and the terrible Yisurim that come along with the acquisition of Eretz Yisrael were clearly evident. And somebody once came to the Bel Zerav, he said, look, I've brought you beautiful fruit from Chutz La'aretz. And he said it was a kind of a bittul in contrast to some grapes that the Hasidim had managed to find growing in a vineyard someplace that seemed a little shriveled, at least from a physical perspective. And the Belzer Rebbe was very upset. He had all of those beautiful fruits from Chutz La'aretz immediately taken out of the room. He said, how can you say that? You have over your fruit from Eretz Yisrael. How can you call other fruit beautiful? This is beautiful. This is what I was mispaled for all of my life. This is the grape that I craved for. And you tell me you brought me a beautiful grape from Paris? The Belzer Rebbe was very upset about it. He was upset with the terminology. He was upset with the hashkafa that was missing in the environment of a tzaddik. Then if one is Zayich and he has the proper taste buds, he can feel the lecha mipir uzbayim mituva that we are mispal for. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu was mispal for. That and the era es ha'aretz ha'tayva. Let Klal Yisrael be able to see the goodness of the land. Let me go over and show them how you look at a fruit in Eretz Yisrael. When you're at 13th Avenue, you walk into a fruit store, so you look at a bunch of grapes on the outside and a cluster of grapes on the inside, and you turn it this way and you turn it that way, and you wonder whether it's worth the extra price. And there are certain guidelines. You take a cantaloupe, there are certain guidelines. You press it this way, you press it that way, and you know whether it's good or it's not good, and you either do or don't haggle on the price. In Eretz Yisrael, it's not the way you look at a grape. It's not the way you look at a cantaloupe or any other fruit. And if that is the way that you're looking at it, then you're missing the point. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Eber Navi Eretz Ha'aretz. The Bais allow me to go into Eretz Yisrael. Let me see the land. Let me teach Klal Yisrael how you look at a fruit in Eretz Yisrael. How you can even take a shrivel group and see Kiddushas Ha'aretz and feel the Ashrat HaShechina being digested by your neshama. Let me show Klal Yisrael how to do that. So presumably this is how the Bach would learn the Gemara in Masechta Sotah. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu have a craving to come into Eretz Yisrael? You think he wanted the fruit the way you go and buy a geschmack of fruit for a salad in a supermarket? Nonsense. If that would be the case, then we wouldn't say the Nechel Mipriv is buying Mituva in our Nichya, in our Gefen. El Rabbi Kacham and Moshe. Have a mitzvah Mistava Yisrael. The English Skaimin over the Eretz Yisrael. Echonis Anila Arz Kadesh Yiskaimu Kula Al Yadai. I want to come into Eretz Yisrael, and I want to pick up a grape, and I want to show Klal Yisrael. You see, this very grape that grows in California, there's no Chiyuv Truma, there's no Indian of Meisers on it. It doesn't have Kiddushas Ha'aretz. This grape, if we are Zaycha, then even the physical aspect of the grape is big and beautiful. But even the shriveled grape that I'm holding in my hand, that grows in Eretz Yisrael, is full of Ashras HaShechina. It's whether it's Midaraisa or Midarabanan. There is Ashras HaShechina in this grape. And if you can develop an environment of Kiddusha around this grape, then by eating this grape you are a completely different person. You have been elevated with every chew, with every swallow. And you are justified in being Mispalel, the Nechel Mipirya, the Nizba Mituva. It's not a steer to what Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want. The Mishnah says in Masechta Sotah that if someone is riding on a donkey and it comes time to daven, and for whatever reason he cannot get off the donkey, and there's a whole issue there. He's supposed to daven towards Mizrach, he can't figure out which way is Mizrach. So Lamaisa, if you have to, in a worst case scenario, it's not the best way to daven, but stay on the donkey, daven, and in your heart, be mechavein to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Because remember, all of the tefillos go through Yerushalayim, through the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Beis HaMikdash Olmatas, Mechuvim Keneged the Beis HaMikdash Olmayla. Dr. Satmar Rav Zecham Levracha, we see a very big thing from here. A person who is sitting on a donkey and thinking about the Kodesh HaKadoshim, his tefillos go straight up. But a person who is physically standing in the Kodesh HaKadoshim and thinking about donkeys, his tefillos may go nowhere. Moshe Rabbeinu was Mispal LeEbron and cross over in the era. Let me see the land. So Chazal tell us, Tefillah is enough. Tefillah accomplishes at least half. Moshe Rabbeinu asked, I want to cross over and see the land. So Kadosh Baruch Hu said, you can't go into the land, but come here and I can show it to you. But is this really half of what Moshe Rabbeinu asked for? The end is, the Baal Shem HaKadosh says that no tefillah is disregarded. You should never think if he was mispal for something, and according to his perception, his human limited perception, apparently his issue was not resolved. A person should not think that his tefillah are wasted. Every single tefillah is accepted, except that we don't always know what's good for us. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu applies it in a way that is best. We don't know that. Even Chas Hashem, people were mispal for a chayla, and that chayla went on to the Olam HaEmes. So those tefillahs work with the neshama, those tefillahs apply to the children. There's no such thing as a tefillah that is unanswered. But even in terms of our human perception, tefillah is enough. Tefillah accomplishes half. But it seems a little frivolous over here, I mean, we know how badly Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael. He said, let me go in and let me see it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, as if, I caught you now. You asked for two things, technically, to go in and to see it. I'll show it you, but you won't go in. Is that really half of what Moshe Rabbeinu wanted? Dr. Fasenes, it is if you understand Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillah. Moshe Rabbeinu was mispala, let me cross over and let me see. What did he mean, let me see? That meant, as we discussed earlier, let me show Klal Yisrael how to see. And Moshe Rabbeinu was mispala even more. Moshe Rabbeinu was mispala that even if Klal Yisrael is not zeicha to physically be in Eretz Yisrael, and even if they have 2,000 long and difficult years of golus ahead of them, that is whipping them away from Eretz Yisrael, give Klal Yisrael a koyach, that in their hearts and in their minds they should feel that they are tied to Eretz Yisrael, that is their home, that is our home. And everywhere else is galus. Sometimes a difficult galus, sometimes a pleasant galus. We owe hakaras hatoiv. We owe to be mentioned where we are. But remember, it's still galus. And if Klal Yisrael really has a yearning for Eretz Yisrael, let them have the ability to create the kiddush of Eretz Yisrael in their homes and in their bati midrashim. This is what Moshe Rabbeinu was mispal for. Let me cross over. That's what I would want. And let Klal Yisrael be able to see and feel Eretz Yisrael even if they're not there. That was indeed 50% of his tefillah. And tefillah Isamech HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, that I will grant you. Come up over here and see Eretz Yisrael. Even from the distance, Moshe Rabbeinu viewed Eretz Yisrael. And that explains the Svasenes, implanted into the hearts of Klal Yisrael forever after, that even from the distance we close our eyes and we are in Eretz Yisrael. We can be sitting on a donkey and be Mechavin Levi Keneged Kodesh HaKadoshim, and our tefillah go through Yerushalayim up to the Kisei HaKavod. We daven Shachris and Mincha, corresponding to what? The Gemara in the Sechus Bracha says, to the Tamid Shel Shachar, to the Tamid Shel Beinu Abayim. Now the Tamid Shel Shachar and the Tamid Shel Beinu Abayim were two very precious karbonis. They were the communal karbonis that protected Klal Yisrael. Kol man, the Klal Yisrael was makar that Karban Tamid, then the walls of Yerushalayim could not be breached. The Gemara tells us even when there were internal fights, the walls of Yerushalayim could not be breached. Every single day they dropped down a bag of coins and a sheep was brought up until the enemy was told, as long as Klal Yisrael was makar of that Karban Tamid, you're never going to be able to get in. So the next day they dropped down a basket, and instead of a sheep, a chazer was put in, and that chazer clawed into the walls of Yerushalayim, and all of Eretz Yisrael shuddered, Daled Me'ez Parsa, Daled Me'ez Parsa. This is the Karban Tamid that protected Klal Yisrael. The end of the Karban Tamid meant the opening of the walls of Yerushalayim. How could we even suggest that by us opening a siddur in the morning and saying the Parsha of Tamid, that somehow emulates, that somehow, even in a remote way, brings down the kiddush and the protection of the Karban Tamid? The Shlach HaKadosh says, it gives us the words, the Eish HaMizbech took a boy that burns out the machshavas zoros, the bad machshavas the person had overnight. I mean, that we understand when there's a fire on the Mizbech. How can we do that with just a fire in our siddur? Or a fire in our hearts that is supposed to be burning when the siddur is open? And the answer is, this is all part of Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillah. Dr. Svasenes, this is what Chazal mean when Chazal say tefillah oiseh mechzeh, that the tefillah accomplished at least half. That a yid can ride on a donkey and think about the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and his tefillahs go through the Kodesh HaKadoshim to Shemayim. And it makes no difference if that donkey is in Eretz Yisrael or that donkey is in a remote part of Africa or in the North Pole. If the youth's heart is in Yerushalayim, then his tefillahs go through Yerushalayim. That is the request and granting of the Eretz Haaretz. Klal Yisrael always sees Eretz Yisrael. Chazal tells us Moshe Rabbeinu was mispal tefillahs communion vaeschanan to be able to go in. And as explained earlier, it's not that all of those tefillahs were rejected. All of those tefillahs were reapplied. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael and build a Beis Hamikdash. There shouldn't be a galus, but there had to be a galus. But if there has to be a galus, Klal Yisrael needs a kiyum in galus. And the kiyum of Klal Yisrael in galus is based on the tefillahs of Moshe Rabbeinu that were applied. Chazal tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu had been mispal one more tefillah, he would have been granted. He would have been allowed to come into Eretz Yisrael, and therefore the Eibusher told him, Al Taisef, no more. The Gra says Moshe Rabbeinu had a Messiah if he says the word no, please, twice. In one sentence, his tefillah is going to be answered. So he already began Ebron no the Eretz Haaretz, and he was about to say no again, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu said no. Rablach, Al Taisef da'aver alai. Because by Miriam we find he said, Kel no, the son no, la, he said no twice, and right away she was healed.
But here HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, don't say the word no again, because then your tefillos have to be granted. But I need your tefillos for Klal Yisrael, to ensure the kiyum of Klal Yisrael and Golus. And Moshe Rabbeinu, who was always Moshe Nefesh himself for Klal Yisrael, stopped right there. And this is why we read Parshas vaeschanan always, basically always the week after Tisha B'Av. Because we read the Yisrael Sedibus, we makabel the Torah upon ourselves again, because Tisha B'Av was also the limit of Torah. We also have over here the yearning for Eretz Yisrael, the love for Eretz Yisrael that Moshe Rabbeinu instilled into our heart, and a reminder that although the apple piece of Hismanei, even though we may not be in Eretz Yisrael yet, and even though we need much rachman and many Yeshuas, but the heart of the Yid is still in Eretz Yisrael. Close your eyes and you can see it. Open your heart and you'll feel it. Why? Who am I to be able to say I feel Eretz Yisrael over here in Parksville, New York? And the answer is, it's not that it's your doing. Moshe Rabbeinu was already mispower for you, and Moshe Nefesh himself for you.
So every day, twice a day, and if you count in the Karbonos and Kriya Shema Lamita 4 times a day, we say Shema, we read V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecha b'chol me'odecha. And then we go on to the next pasuk, V'hayu ha'devarim ha'ela asher anechi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha, and we go on to the third pasuk, V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta ba. But you know, you can say Kriya Shema your whole life and miss the connection over here, as pointed out by Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zanefeld Zecher Tzadik Levach. But in order to appreciate how he explains the flow, I would like to share with you a small vignette, a small scene that gives us an accurate portrait of what the mechus and the lifelong yearning of this tzaddik was. There was a famous Talmud Chacham and a great Afghan, a successful businessman in Yerushalayim by the name of Rav Moshe Rosenblatt. Rav Moshe arrived in Eretz Yisrael having gone through all of the trials and tribulations of that time period. He understood very well what it meant, Yisrael Eretz Yisrael. He had to stare down Gehenna many times until he arrived in Haifa. Now he made a controversial decision. He settled in Haifa because he felt that he had a possibility of drawing parnasa from the ports over there. He dealt with importing and exporting things. He would have never done that, even at the expense of hunger, had there not been a yeshiva in Haifa. Now, to get a little of an historical perspective on this, Haifa was the center for the communists, for the socialists, for those who had the ideas that were going to change the world forever. And the major ingredient for their ideology, of course, was kfira. There was, however, one yeshiva that was set up by an Erlich Yid, Reb Meir Rubman. This little yeshiva was an island that had isolated itself from the apikosis that had threatened the underpinnings of Klal Yisrael. Of course, if you would have told these communist or socialist groups that a generation later or a few generations later, all of their ideology and all of their ideas and all of their hopes for the future that was going to change the world would be left in the fossils of history, and that little yeshiva would be the one that continues to exist, they would have laughed at you. The same way they laughed at Reb Meir Rubman during his time. But he was unfazed, and because Reb Meir Rubman had the yeshiva, that Reb Moshe Rosenblatt was able to settle in Haifa, and he sent his 2 children, Michal and Shalom, to the yeshiva. During one occasion, Reb Moshe Rosenblatt took his 2 children, Michal and Shalom, to the Kaisel, and also to a visit to Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zanefeld. Rabbi Yosef Chaim took the 2 little children and treated them as if they were his own grandchildren. He affectionately twirled their payas and shut the whole world and all of its problems out and sat down and spoke to these 2 little children. When he heard that they are learning in the one Fum Yeshiva in Haifa, he stood up, lifted both of his hands, and with his eyes sparkling like diamonds, declared the pasuk, Baruch Matzav Gevul Alman. Ashrei, how fortunate am I that I am zeicha to see children who are learning Torah in Haifa, even in the Haifa of that time period. The tzaddik verheard them, and then he wasn't just going to say goodbye and let them leave. No, he would walk them all the way until the gates of the city. And when it came time to part at the gateway of the city, he put his 2 hands on their head and the children could feel that the tzaddik was benching them with all of his heart. And in his parting words, he said to them, so children, your names are Shalom and Michael. Shalom and Michael are gematria v'itai, in its time. Asher pirya yitain v'itai. May Hashem give you a bracha, that whenever you need a Yeshua, whenever you need help, it should come in its time. One of the children later wrote that heaven and earth can testify that the bracha of the tzaddik was niskayim, was fulfilled to the letter of the law. He said he could write a whole sefer on the nisim and the flois that happened in the course of his life, how whenever he needed a Yeshua, it was there for him. And there was no question where this bracha was emanating from. Now, having studied that scene, how Rabbi Yosef Chaim stopped everything and devoted his whole focus, his whole attention, his whole heart and mind to these two children whom he never met before. Keeping this in mind, let's see how Rabbi Yosef Chaim teaches the pasuk. How does a person fulfill the Yahavtas Hashem Elokecha? You should love Hashem. So he quotes the Malbim who says a person has to fulfill this mitzvah b'machshava, in thought, b'dibur, in speech, u'b'maisa, and through action. And the rest of the parasha details all three. In your heart, there should be no other machshavos in your heart. Your whole essence should be committed to the love of Hashem Yisbarach. In dibur, you should speak words of Torah. But where is the Maisa in this pasuk? It's the vaeschanan levanecha. In other words, says Rabbi Yosef Chaim, yes, you have to love Hashem with all of your heart. Yes, you have to speak words of Torah wherever you are. But all the machshav and all the dibur in the world falls short if you don't carry it out l'maisa. The proof is in the pudding, as the world says. And talk is cheap. If you imagine a Havas Hashem and talk about Torah, but when it comes to doing, you don't do, so the integrity of those machshavos and dibur is questionable. So where are the instructions in this pasuk of the Maisa? Where is the first application of what I physically can do, so that the Yahavas Hashem that I'm dreaming about and talking about manifests itself? And the answer is vaeschanan levanecha. How do you teach your children? How do you establish yourself as a role model to convey Yahavas Hashem and Yiras Hashem to your children? This is where we see whether you love Hashem or not. So the Rebbeinu Shem is letting you know in no uncertain terms that my main nachas ruach is how you mechanach your children. And I quote from a letter from Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zanachal. The ein nachas ruach gadol yoiser lahakadosh baruch hu me'asher chinuch habanim l'Torah. V'zehu ha'oisher hanitzchi. This is the riches that lasts forever. V'zeh, down here in this world, u'buzah, and in the world to come. The Gemara tells us that Yeshua ben Gamla made a takana. His takana was lahoishiv melamdei tenoikiyas b'chol medina u'medina u'b'chol ir v'ir. Every single city, wherever you have yidden, you have to have a cheder. You have to have a rebbe teaching children. And if you don't have a cheder for your children, you don't belong in that city. And the Gemara goes on to explain as follows. Shebetchila, at first, Misha yesh le'av melamdei Torah. Someone had a father, the father taught him Torah. Misha ein le'av. If someone didn't have a father, lo ye'lam Torah, he didn't learn. There was a terrible misconception that somehow, if he's not your child, he's not your responsibility. As if to say it's the Rebbeinu Shem's problem who should teach him Torah. And their mistake was based on misunderstanding of pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'limametem oisam es b'nechem u'daber ba." But it's not spelled Aleph Vav Saf Mem. It's spelled Aleph Saf Mem. So if you don't have nekudas, you read "V'limametem atem es b'nechem." Atem instead of oisam, not them. Rather, you teach your children someone else's child, not your concern. So the Yeshua ben Gamla made it very clear that the pasuk is read "V'limadetem oisam." You have to teach them. Whoever that them is, whoever's on your block, whoever's in your Dalet Amos, whoever's in your city, you have to do your achrayis. Whether it's beguf, whether it's b'mamayin, whether it's with a smile, whatever it is to teach. So B'chon asked the Gemara the Gekasha. How did they make this mistake of the V'limadetem atem? Didn't they learn in Parshas vaeschanan in the first parsha of Kriyas Shema, before they got to Parshas Eikev? Didn't we learn the pasuk of Vaeshanantam levanecha? Are you going to say, well, that's all part of the same mistake? The mitzvah is just Vaeshanantam levanecha, just to your children and not to someone else's child. But wait, how could they make such a mistake? Frekt Rabbi Chanan, this is a free dashens befeirish. Vaeshanantam levanecha elu atamidim hakurim banim. They knew all the midrashim, didn't they? Asks Rabbi Chanan. They knew it says Kol Malamed as Ben Chaverei Torah Ki'ilu Yaldai. So Vaeshanantam levanecha includes everyone, your child and your friend's child. So Rabbi Chanan says a modikatif of art. And before we get to the point over here of how Rabbi Chanan conveys this to us, let's go back to that little story again. Rabbi Yasser Chaim Zonnefeld walked them to the gateways, walked them all the way to the edge of Batei Machzah, and as he was about to part with them, probably never to see them again, he put both of his hands on their heads, on the heads of these children, closed his eyes, and he committed his whole metzius, every fiber of his being, to a bracha, to the greatest bracha in the world. He told them their names are gematria Be'itai, and whenever you have a problem in your life, Be'itai, the Yeshua should come right there and then, in that time. Why didn't he begin with this bracha? I mean, after all, if he wanted to be makar of them, here are children from a city with his little Torah. So to wake them up, to get them interested, to get them to stop staring out the window, you give them the biggest gift. Rather, if you follow the way the story went, first he praised their yeshiva, he fahered them, not to test them, to try to chop them that they don't know, but to speak with them in learning, and one can imagine he gave over some varmkeit to them, taught them how a piece of Gemara can shine, and after he learns with them a little bit, he walks them to the edge of the city and he gives them this bracha. Rabbi Chanan says that the mistake of the people, until Rabbi Yeshua ben Gamliel set them straight, that is, the mistake that the people had was, yes, if you learn with someone, then it's Ki'ilu Yaldai. They knew the drush of the Sifri, Vaeshanantam levanecha elu atamidim, that once you sit down and you start learning, if you're truly giving over Torah with any level of Torah Lishma, so they become your children, not just your Talmidim. That they understood. They knew of the pasuk of Vaeshanantam levanecha. But who says there's a chiyuv to start learning with that? In their feeling, in their emotions, it was, listen, if I have nothing to do with him, he's not my problem. Once I start learning with him, he becomes my Talmud. Then his actions are a reflection of me, a reflection of his Rebbe. But if I don't take him into the yeshiva to start with, there's no problem, right? He's not my Talmud, he's someone else's problem. Or he's just another number on the street. Nothing to do with me, not my responsibility. I don't have to worry about what he says, what he does, or how he acts. So the Vaeshanantam levanecha was a very easy thing to work around. Yes, you are obligated to commit yourself to your Talmidim, but who says you have to make him your Talmud? Who says you have to teach him? Then they came to the next parsha. Teach them. So they tried to work around it. They said, well, look the way it's spelled. It's spelled atem. Teach your children, not them. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Gamliel came running and said, no. You know what the Torah wants from you. And every single person is responsible to make sure that this is done. If not, your Medina is not a Medina and your ear is not an ear. You have no right to live there. You know that this Velumadetem, which is spelled Atem, is to be read Oisam. You know what the real meaning of the Vaeshanantam levanecha is. Not just once you teach him, he's your Talmud, but you're obligated to start with, to go out and to teach him and make him your Talmud and make him your son. Rabbi Yasser Chaim teaches Torah to them, and then they become his children, and then he benches them like a child benches his father. I wish that you never have a problem. I wish whatever you need, you'll have. Follow the sequence that the Torah teaches us over here. Now, how does Rashi teach the word Vaeshanantam? So Rashi quotes the Chazal, Lashon Chidutu, a Lashon of sharpening yourself. Yevon Ezra brings the pasuk, Chetz Shanan, the sharp arrow. In other words, the words of Torah should be sharp in your mouth. Shemi shacha adam dadar. If someone asks you a shaila, but they tzarech legamgem, you shouldn't say, well, I don't know, I have to check, I have to ask the board, no comment today. That's called legamgem. Ela rather, amar lumiyad, you should have the answer on your lips, say it to him. So there's a kash over here. It would appear then, the way Rashi learns, that the shinantam is an independent chiyuv on every individual to sharpen himself to acquire as much knowledge as he can. The levanecha is another chiyuv, a chiyuv of chinuch. So there should be a slash over here. There should be some type of separation between the shinantam and the levanecha. Yet the pasuk seems to put it all in one sentence, in one phrase, as if the two are connected to each other. And the answer is they are. For the only way the Torah really becomes sharp and clear is by teaching. The Rambam says in Hilchos Talmud Torah, "Hatalmidim mosifin chachmas harav umarchivin libay." And the Rambam says an interesting mashal. Just like sometimes a little splinter can light a big fire, a tiny little fire can set a whole forest ablaze. The Talmud Katan, who's the splinter, at the right time sharpens the Rav, can set the chachma of the Rav ablaze. Through the questions of the Talmud, the Rebbe is forced to answer, and that brings out the beauty of his chachma. So the Torah is saying that the two are connected. The shinantam levanecha. If you're not going to teach, if you're not going to verbalize the words to your Talmud, to your chavusa, then you'll never really understand it. You'll never bring out the chachma that potentially is in your own mind. Reb Chaim Volozhin says on the Gevart, on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, V'hamidu Talmidim Harba. If a shachar wants to check his knife to make sure it's smooth, so he uses his fingernail. The fingernail will catch the tiny little pagam in the knife. So the fingernail is the means of catching the tiniest little flaw in the knife. In that same light, the mouth is the means of catching a flaw in your machshava. You can think something and imagine something 100 years, and you could swear to yourself that it's a correct svara. But once you verbalize it and someone else is listening to it, if there's any flaw there, only then will it be caught. He says, "Hapeh margish pegimas hasechel, kitzipoyin pegimas hasakin." So the Torah is teaching us something over here. Vishinantam levanecha. You want to learn, you want to be smart, you want to be clear in Torah. You know the way to do that? Not to lock yourself up in a room, but it's to find a chavusa that you can learn from or that you can teach to. It's to sit down with your child and learn. By verbalizing it to others, only then will your mind become clear. Vishinantam can only be fulfilled through levanecha. There is no slash in between, because the two are inseparable. You can't have shinun without levanecha. This is what we mentioned many times. The Nechtam Sefer says we read the Aseret HaDibros always right after Tisha B'Av, because on Tisha B'Av you weren't allowed to learn, so we're makabel the Torah on ourselves anew. But perhaps included in that is the following message as well. Until now we cried for the Beis HaMikdash. If we cried harder, we could have brought the Geula. But now that Tisha B'Av is over and we have to deal with the reality of Golus, the Torah gives us the following message. If you devote your life to chinuch habanim, that means when Mashiach is going to come, he will find an audience there to receive him. And he knows that's only because each generation passed it on to the other generation. That means he will be makotov to you as much as to the people who receive him. Hopefully that will be us, but even if chas v'shalom not, through the shinantam levanecha, we are part and parcel of Geula.
This shiur is distributed by Kolodas, 11 Stay Chemet Street, Yerushalayim. For donations, please call 02-5383999. Fax 02-538-0267. Postbox 57035.